Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Resilient Leadership Podcast, where everything that we talk about is aimed at helping you to lead with a greater sense of calm, clarity, and conviction, even in anxious times. My name is Bridget Tyre, and as always, I am joined by my good friend and collaborator, Irvine Nugent. Irvine, say hello to folks and tell them how you're doing.
Well, hello, everyone. It's been a little bit. You may have noticed we've been on a little summer hiatus. We took a month off to rest and relax and get our thoughts. And so it's good to be back. And hopefully everyone's had a chance to relax a little bit. I'm enjoying this weather now in the DC area. It just feels like fall is on its way now. If you know anything about DC, it'll come back and slap you in the face with a 100-degree day somewhere in the upcoming days. But overall, we're getting there. I'm really, really excited about today's episode. I think it's a really good one to come back from summer and to think about. And today we're going to talk about or reflect upon what does it mean to be a well-differentiated leader, and how this can really be a powerful idea as we, lead our lives. Now, you may be familiar with that term because we have mentioned it quite a few times before. And of course, it was first coined by Murray Bowen and then elaborated by Ed Friedman, his protege. And both of them have really come up with this concept, which I think is more important now than ever. So, Bridget, over to you. Give us a little more, expand this idea of what we're talking about when we mention a well-differentiated leader.
Oh, it's just such a critical component of leadership, not one that I think we're taught, not one that is necessarily well understood, but in today's climate, climate of polarization and anxiety and conflict and lots of news headlines that can make everybody feel a bit unsettled.
Yeah.
I think having well-differentiated leaders in our families and our teams and our organizations is paramount.
Yeah.
So I think timing is great to revisit this and devote an entire session to it. And we're going to go directly to the source, Ed Friedman himself, in his seminal book, A Failure of Nerve. And we'll be sharing 6 of the characteristics of well-differentiated leaders in just a moment. But let me take a stab at sort of just defining what this means. And then, Irvine, I'm curious to hear what it provokes for you. Well-differentiated leaders are able to do something I think is pretty tricky, which is that they are able to stand apart from the crowd while still staying powerfully connected to other people, even those that disagree with them or challenge them. And if you think about it, that's not always easy to do, because you can stand apart by disconnecting to people and saying, well, you're crazy, I stand over here. But to be able to really stand apart in such a way that people see you as the leader and feel connected with you, even under pressure and stress, that's what we're after. And it requires 2 really important things: self-definition. So do we know and are we connected to who are we? Where are we going? Why are we going there? And self-regulation. Do we have the capacity to manage our own anxiety, our own pressures and stressors, such that they don't leak out onto our families and our teams and our organizations? So that's what it's all about. And it's a journey of a lifetime. None of us arrive and say, I'm perfectly differentiated. Yay for me. So, Irvine, what do you think?
There's a few things that come to mind. I remember when I first heard this, just how difficult a task it really is as we live our lives, because so often it is easy to be swept up by the group around us. And I know with myself, I struggle a little bit with wanting to fit in. Listeners know that I grew up in Northern Ireland, and really that had turned tribal. And, you were in a tribe, and to raise your head above that, to have a different voice or an opinion was frowned upon. So this concept of, I remember when I first heard about well differentiated, it's like, boy, that's hard. And then, the other thing that comes to mind as well, just in the world of social media, where being in the in-group and being part of that and feeling you want to. So I think it is so important in the turmoil of what we're in to really be very clear about what I stand for. And so just I think the thing that strikes me most is that is a lifetime journey, and it is a struggle. And it's something I think we calibrate each and every day of our lives.
So well said. It is not an easy journey to embark upon.
Yeah.
As we live our lives, there are many, many challenges and obstacles to being on this path to well differentiated leadership because, as you spoke about, our tribes, whatever they may be constituted as, want us to be with
Oh,
them. You
yes.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, and yet beyond just interesting, it really is the underpinning of a leader's ability to do many things that leaders have to do. For example, have tough conversations. For example, lead people through change, and when they resist you, don't cave in,
Yeah.
right? Many, many facets of leadership are effectuated, if you will, by being a more well differentiated person. So, again, we're going to get into those 6 qualities and paint a picture for our listeners. But, Irvin, we often like to share a neuroscience tidbit.
Yeah.
And because that can illuminate, what's going on in the brain that helps us understand leadership better. This time we're going to call on a different science and just share a little tidbit from biology that
Yeah.
I think illuminates this notion that self-differentiation isn't just about leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fascinating, because we are biological beings. And at times, I think both of us agree that sometimes in leadership, we kind of focus on what's above the neck and we forget our bodies. But it's fascinating just to look at, kind of how we are formed as human beings. And it's interesting because differentiation is a really important facet in really the smallest part, which is the cellular part of our beings. And what we see there in biology is that cells are unspecified at the beginning, and all of a sudden they become specialized. For example, they become a liver cell or they become a heart cell and they join like-minded cells, and that's how an organ actually is formed. And this is, of course, has been studied for a very long time. But what's interesting about some new research is that it's happening even earlier than was previously believed. And so, like, once a human egg is fertilized, it begins to divide, into 2 cells and then 4 cells and then 8 cells and so on and so on. And what this new research is showing that these very early embryonic cells, they begin to differ from one another just at that 4-cell state. Just like
Wow.
imagine that. They become differentiated to, form part of the placenta or another part of the embryo. And of course, this kind of picks up speed as it's differentiated even more. And so therefore we get, the different organs forming, and they find other like-minded cells, and these essential organs begin to build. And so therefore, when you think of this cellular level, like the basic part of how we form as human beings, differentiation is part of becoming unique and separate self, and yet at the same time able to join with like-minded other cells to form bigger things. So it's just fascinating, kind of baked into this very fabric of who we are as human beings and how we build ourselves up in the biological level. Differentiation is part of that. So curious, kind of, Bridget, what does that provoke within you?
Yeah, well, I just think, any true principle, it's going to be true across lots of domains, isn't it? You're
Yeah.
not going to just find it in one slice. You're going to see that principle show up. And
Mm.
Murray Bowen understood this because, he looked at nature and the animal kingdom. And a lot of what he talked about wasn't just human behavior, but it was behavior that you saw in all animals and in nature itself. So I just think it's so cool to think that when an embryo is only 4 cells old, the process of differentiation is beginning, just beginning, which tells us at a basic level, it's essential to life.
Yeah.
And therefore it's essential to leadership.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that, Irvin. That's so, so cool. Okay, so we promised our listeners that we were going to share these 6 characteristics of well differentiated leaders. And I want to kind of just suggest a way of framing it, which is to think of these as muscles.
Mm.
And some of these muscles are undoubtedly stronger than others in us. And I invite our listeners, as we go through these 6 qualities, to be thinking about which of these muscles have you taken to the gym and you feel there's some strength there. And is there a muscle or two that's calling to you as like, hey, I need you to pay attention here. I need you to build me. And then what would that be?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Irvine, why don't get us started? And again, our source is a failure of nerve. We're going to Ed Friedman's words himself, but he spoke of other qualities. We've decided to pick 6. So give us a couple of them.
Let's maybe start this with 2. So the first one would be this capacity. Differentiation is the capacity to take a clear stand in an intense emotional system. Just think about that. A lot of emotions around, a lot of anxiety, etc. Can I take a clear stand in that? And a second one, which is a close kind of relative to this, is this ability to say I in the midst of this emotional kind of system when others are demanding we. Let's just use a little practical example of where that comes. So when I think about this, I come to a time when I was leading an organization and there was a lot of anxiety around the services we were offering. And there was a push, there was a lot of pressure coming from the board that we needed to expand a service. And one of those services was housing. We hadn't done that before. And this was around kind of for disadvantaged youth. And there was this pressure, this push, and there was a lot of anxiety around that. And in the table, kind of around the meeting table, we were saying, yes, we need this service. And there was a lot of, yeah, that's after this service. Oh, yeah, we need this service. It was very much turning into groupthink,
Mm-hmm.
There was no one. And then there was one person who actually had the courage to say, actually, I think this is a really bad decision.
Oh.
And I tell you, the dagger eyes that this woman got. And so, first of all, just the initial courage to say, in the midst of this, kind of patting her back, this is a great idea. To be initially say, I don't think this is a good idea. And then it was kind of what followed from that was, well, let me tell you why. And then she kind of expounded about, she obviously had done a lot of research around, this might not be the right timing. And then I don't think we thought about different things. And I'm curious about what would happen here and there and the other. And of course, what was interesting was there was this emotional tussle about, we don't want to be challenged, and there was a little defensiveness, et cetera. But what was interesting, I don't think there was resolution at the end of that meeting, but it was enough to enter into a person that was able to say I, and able to, in the midst of all that emotional pressure, to introduce an idea which all of a sudden kind of began to take a life of its own. And that's really what's happening here, because on paper it looks easy, but boy, in action, that is actually something that requires courage. It requires a lot of what we call differentiation, to go against kind of what's the thought there. And yet the power of that leadership was actually made us make a better decision.
Wow, what a great example. So she literally did stand apart from the crowd.
Totally.
And
Yes.
yet they listened and heard her. So that must have mean she did a good job of staying connected too.
She did. She was able to know this is where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It's coming from like let's think about this. Let's think about. She was able to maintain a level of curiosity that had been lost, and so she really did a great job of remaining connected and challenging, and kind of worked through that initial dagger eyes, and we don't want to be challenged. And then she was able to remain connected with us. And, because I'm thinking she could have easily just been shut down and kept quiet. Okay, then okay. But no, she kind of maintained that. So yeah, it was really good.
That is a beautiful example. I love that of both taking a stand in the I when everyone else is we, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So what about you, Bridget? You must have seen some other examples of this in action too.
Oh, sure. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about a client of mine who she took an unpopular stand in her senior team where they were deciding the fate of a particular employee who had produced a lot of financial results for the company, but was a bear to work with and
Mm,
was wreaking havoc on her teams. Lots of people didn't want to work with her. And everybody was like, well, we need to keep her because she produces great results. And some people really enjoy working with her, blah, blah. She went out on a limb and said, I believe very strongly we need to let her go. And the
mm,
reason is we state in our values that collaboration and teamwork is how we do business. And that's not how she does business.
mm.
And there was a lot of quiet in the room. I remember it's like, oh, good point. And it was like your example, it was a very unpopular thing to say.
Yeah,
I think she found the courage to say it because she deeply believed it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Love
So,
that. So that's the first two. Bridget, why did you introduce the next two? I know we've got 3 and 4.
yes. Okay. So, two others are that differentiation is about being clear about one's own values, vision, and principles.
Mm,
What is it that truly matters to us? Who are we and what do we care about really? And not only being clear about that, but staying connected to that. Because I think that one of the realities of modern life is that we can lose touch with that which truly enlivens us. We can
mhm,
lose touch with what we deeply care about, why we're doing what we're doing, or what
mm.
are the values at stake. So that's a key piece is clarifying, articulating, and staying in touch. And as we evolve and grow, it's an ongoing conversation because what you care about at 24 is not what you necessarily care about at 44, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then the other one, and boy, do I think this is a doozy, is taking maximum responsibility for one's own emotional being and destiny rather than blaming others or the context.
Mm,
So, what does that really mean? Well, it means that as a leader, we do not blame our team or our colleagues or other people for the results that we're seeing. We don't play the blame game. We also don't blame ourselves, but we do look for the role that we play in the results that we're getting in our personal lives and in our professional lives. We don't look to say, well, the reason that didn't happen is because the market is really bad, or the reason I wasn't able to, be patient with my child is because I had a terrible day and, blah, blah, blah. We just go back to, okay, what's my part in this? And how will I be more responsible next time so that I can generate a different result?
yeah.
Yeah. And don't we crave leaders who do that? I mean, who are able to stand before their employees, their team, their followers, and say, I know I had a role in this. This is what it was. And I commit to you that I'm going to do better next time.
Yeah, absolutely. That level of transparency and honesty.
Do you think that's kind of rare?
I do. I think it takes a rather unique leader to be fully transparent and transparent internally and externally. I find that to leaders who are able to shine a light on what's happening inside into some of the pressures or perhaps some of them getting caught up in an emotion or whatever is so helpful, and yet I rarely see it happening. You get leaders who are, say something goes wrong, they get caught up more in the, well, what went wrong, or even without blaming others, but what went wrong. And it's very much, kind of a
External.
external kind of, yeah, we should have done this or that, we didn't get that. But then to kind of like a little like, yeah, I got caught up with this, kind of like, whoa, I didn't think about this, or I got moved, or different. I think that's rare, and I think so freeing for others to hear.
Mm-hmm. Paves the way for other people to do the same thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What about for you, Irvin, like an example, if you will, either in your own life or a client of the other quality that I mentioned, which is really being clear about and connected to your personal values and vision and
Yeah.
principles?
One coaching client that comes to mind for this was a younger father whose son was beginning to kind of, I think they were playing soccer, and he was in a work culture that had unspoken rules. And the work culture was, that if there was a project, you stay late and that's it, no questions asked type of thing. And I remember he was struggling this conflict between his own personal values, which was, it was very interesting. I remember in the coach said, well, my father was not around when I was growing up. And I always promised that I would not be that person, that relationship is for me the value I prize most. And I said, well, then what does that mean? And it says, well, then I'm going to have to make some difficult choices. And then that tussle there of the values in it. And it's only really when the values meet these choices, we can say we value something, but where we really know that we really do value something is when we make a choice in favor of that and it has consequences. And he did. He actually made consequences. He said, I'm going to choose to do this. So I just thought it was a beautiful example of that and so difficult to do, so difficult to do.
Yeah. And yet, I bet he doesn't regret that.
No.
We could somehow call him up right now and say, hey, do you have any regrets about that choice you made? I bet he'd say
Yeah.
none.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Bridget, about that second one, the taking maximum responsibility for one's own emotional being and destiny? Anything come to mind for you with that?
It's an example that is about, maybe 12 years old. And I just remember sitting in this boardroom, and there had been this event in the life of this organization that involved the CEO and some others that were present, staff, and then there was board members there that had defined the organization for a long time. There was a whole narrative
Mm.
around this story, and it wasn't a positive one. And the organization had failed to move past the event. Many people in the room had long felt that the CEO had played a role in it, but had never acknowledged it. And so in this particular meeting, that's what he did. He got really quiet and he said, when such and such happened, I look back now and I now see so clearly what I didn't see then, or maybe didn't choose to see then,
Yeah.
which is that I took the wrong road there.
Yeah.
And the room was so quiet, and it was a healing moment
Yep.
in the life of that organization. That's a
Mm.
pretty dramatic example, but I think in every day there are small opportunities
Yep.
to make the move of saying, you know what, I'm responsible here,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Love that.
Okay, so now we've discussed 4 musts, but we got 2 more.
Two more. So let me share with listeners those. So differentiation is fifth one is knowing where one ends and another begins. And the final one is being able to cease automatically being one of systems emotional dominoes.
Mm.
So I think with the first one is really as a concept, it's really about boundaries. It's about knowing kind of where one ends and another person begins.
Mhm.
And in its clarity around those boundaries, and especially, healthy boundaries. We started today talking about cells and about how cells differentiate themselves at the very beginning. And then there's also, a part of cell biology, which is interesting as well, about how a healthy cell is very well defined and it protects the integrity of that cell. Whereas, say, a cell like a virus, et cetera, actually doesn't, and it tries to infect others. And so, it's important a well differentiated person is able to maintain their own autonomy and in the midst of what's happening around them is able really to have very healthy boundaries, and those boundaries don't leak and therefore they get caught up in what's happening around them. And boy, do we see this so often, that we can, sometimes in really a false kind of empathy. I think we've discussed this before of
Mhm.
trying to be compassionate, et cetera. And really what's needed is for the leader really actually to be very clear about what are the appropriate boundaries in this situation. And I think that's really helpful. And the second one then is about this automatic kind of dominoes. And it's funny we say this. I actually just watched a YouTube video about 2 weeks ago of there's these world championships of, I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of dominoes, and
No.
and then the elaborate design collapses,
Oh
and
my
if
God.
you're intrigued, like look it up on YouTube. It's actually it's beautiful to watch, but also it reminds us this chain reaction, how easy it is to be caught up in the anxiety of others and just being one of those dominoes, being part of that. And so be able to step back and to really act in a way that differentiates itself from that action that's happening before us is really important.
That's a big one. That is so key to sustainability, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind
Yeah.
of at the heart of it.
Yeah.
That
Totally.
both of those, both the boundaries and the not getting swept up.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the boundaries in place, you will get swept up,
Yeah.
and that will be such a drain
Yeah.
on your energy and your well-being.
Yeah. And you can also see, these are so interconnected with each
Yeah.
other. It's not, they're not each, six very different. They're
Yeah.
actually they're interrelated with each other, and they go into, you can understand how it makes up, a person really being standing out and being self-differentiated.
Yeah, and it makes sense they would be so connected because we talk about having a systems approach,
Yeah.
to this. So in a system, everything's connected.
Yeah.
It's just like in the human body.
Yeah.
There's nothing that happens in isolation. What goes on in the gut affects what goes on in the brain and so forth.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Bridget, we always try and finish each episode with a practice for our listeners to consider, to kind of bring this idea and internalize it in ourselves. What do you suggest for today?
Today, I'm going to suggest that go back to the analogy of these being muscles that can be strengthened. And muscles, of course, are connected to other muscles. There's no muscle that exists in isolation. And yet, we do know that we can focus on a particular muscle group. So I invite our listeners to, think about, okay, they're going into a gym, if you will, and in front of them are these six pieces of equipment that can exercise certain muscle groups. And I'm going to go back over all six. I'm just going to repeat them and listen for perhaps the one that is really speaking to you. Again, they're all interrelated, but use your gut to tell you which
Mm.
one is speaking to you, as in, I need to get some equipment and exercise that one. So, and I'm going to ask you, Irvin, which one is speaking to you in this moment?
Mm.
Okay, so here they are. Number one is differentiation is being able to take a clear stand in an intense emotional system. Differentiation is saying I when others are saying we. Differentiation is being clear about one's own personal values, vision, and principles. Differentiation is taking maximum responsibility for one's own emotional being and destiny rather than blaming others or the context. Differentiation is knowing where one ends and the other begins.
Mm.
And finally, differentiation is being able to cease automatically being one of the system's emotional dominoes.
Mm.
So, what do you think, Irvin? What's speaking to you?
There's one that's really jumping out where I'm at in my life at the moment, and that is the third one. It's being clear about one's own personal values, goals, direction, life. And the reason is that we're myself and my husband Fred we're having some really great conversations around retirement and around what does the future look like, and then it's reminding me, kind of what are my values, like how do I want to live
Yeah,
this out, and are we the same? Are we not? We don't necessarily have to be, but it's
right.
like, what at this stage in my life, what are the most important values? And they've changed. And
Yeah.
so I'm kind of realizing that, and what does that mean for me? And how do I express that? So this is one area I think I'm really actively exploring at the moment.
It's funny that you should say that because for similar reasons, that's one that really speaks to me. And
Mm.
yet, when I read them again, the one that really called to me is number 5. Differentiation is knowing where one ends and the other begins. In large part because my family system has grown so much with grandchildren
Mm.
and really just kind of figuring out the boundaries there, right? And where do I begin and end, and where do others? And I see that as being, in this particular moment in time, really important for me. So I'm going to build some muscle there.
Love it, love it. Well, thank you for those, Bridget. What a great discussion. I'm often struck by clients will ask you, well, what's one thing I can do to be a better leader? Or kind of like, what should I do, et cetera. And I just love this, how self-differentiated are you? Because that really impacts all the other aspects of leadership. So hopefully, today has been really eye-opening for you. And hopefully in one of those 6 muscles, as you reflect upon them, you decide, maybe this is a good place to start self-differentiated. Because the great thing about this, actually, that you can start in any of them. You can enter self-differentiation at any one of these 6. So hopefully you can choose one and maybe think about, how can I exercise that muscle? What would that look like in my life? Please feel free to share kind of the word about this episode. If you think that you've another person in your life that really could benefit, feel free to share the link. And we look forward to joining us in the next episode when we're actually going to look at the topic of sadness and how that impinges in the workplace and in our leadership. So, Bridget, thanks so much for this episode and for all these great ideas today.
Yeah, thank you, Irvine. I so enjoyed the conversation. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye now.